Picture this. It's a few million years ago, somewhere on the East African savanna, and a small, lanky primate is standing upright at the edge of tall grass, scanning the horizon for danger while a troop of baboons forages nearby, completely unbothered, completely uninterested in standing up to look around the way this strange, comparatively scrawny creature keeps doing. Both species are primates. Both have decent brains for their size. Both face similar predators, similar food scarcity, similar environmental pressures. And yet one of these lineages is going to go on to build cities, write symphonies, and eventually wonder why it got to be the smart one, while the other is going to spend the next several million years doing more or less exactly what it's doing right now, foraging, socializing, occasionally fighting over a mate, with no apparent interest in any of that. So here's the question this entire video exists to dig into, because it's genuinely one of the biggest, most debated puzzles in all of evolutionary biology. Why did only ancient humans, out of literally millions of species that have existed on this planet, evolve into the kind of intelligence capable of language, technology, art, and eventually civilization? Stick around, because the honest answer involves a genuinely fascinating combination of lucky accidents, brutal environmental pressure, and a specific evolutionary feedback loop that, once it got started, became almost impossible to stop. And by the end of this, you might walk away with a healthy new respect for just how unlikely your own existence actually was. Let's start by tearing down a really common, really misleading assumption, because it's standing directly in the way of understanding this properly. A lot of people imagine evolution as some kind of ladder, with simple creatures at the bottom and humans triumphantly perched at the top. As if intelligence was always the obvious end goal evolution was steadily working toward. That's not how evolution works at all, and it's worth being direct about that right away. Evolution doesn't have a goal. It doesn't favor intelligence specifically, or strength, or speed, or any particular trait in some universal sense. It favors whatever happens to improve survival and reproduction in a specific environment, at a specific time, and that's it. Sharks have been doing essentially the same successful thing for hundreds of millions of years without ever needing to get noticeably smarter. Crocodiles, too. Plenty of wildly successful species have survived and thrived for an absurdly long time without anything resembling complex cognition, because their specific environment simply never demanded it. Intelligence isn't evolution's destination. It's one possible, fairly costly solution to a very particular, very specific set of problems, and most species across all of evolutionary history simply never encountered the exact combination of pressures that made that costly solution worth developing. And that word costly matters enormously here, because this is genuinely one of the most important pieces of this entire puzzle. A bigger, more complex brain isn't some free upgrade evolution can just hand out whenever it feels convenient. Brains are extraordinarily expensive, metabolically speaking. The human brain, despite making up roughly 2% of total body weight, consumes somewhere around 20% of the body's total energy intake, an absolutely staggering ratio compared to almost every other organ. That energy has to come from somewhere, which means an evolving lineage investing heavily in bigger, more complex brains needs either a genuinely reliable, calorie-dense food supply to fuel that investment, or some other significant survival advantage substantial enough to outweigh the serious metabolic cost involved. Without that kind of clear payoff, evolution simply won't favor growing a bigger brain, because all that extra energy spent on neural tissue is energy not being spent on muscle, reproduction, immune function, or anything else that might provide a more immediate, reliable survival benefit. This is exactly why intelligence remains genuinely rare across the entire animal kingdom. It's not that other species couldn't theoretically evolve toward greater cognitive complexity, it's that the specific cost-benefit math rarely, if ever, tips clearly enough in that direction to make it the winning evolutionary strategy. So let's talk about why that math apparently did tip in our specific evolutionary lineage's favor, because this is where things get genuinely interesting and where several different interlocking factors all happened to line up in a way that's honestly a little eerie when you really sit with it. Let's start with diet, because this connects directly to a topic we covered extensively in our fire video, and it deserves real attention here too. There's a well-supported hypothesis suggesting that our ancestors' shift toward incorporating more meat, and crucially, more fat, into their diet, combined eventually with cooking, provided exactly the kind of calorie-dense, easily digestible fuel source needed to support an increasingly expensive, energy-hungry brain. A diet built primarily around tough, fibrous plant material, the kind requiring an enormous energy-intensive digestive system to extract adequate nutrition, simply doesn't leave much metabolic room left over for also funding a massive brain. Our ancestors' dietary shift, gradually incorporating more meat, marrow, and eventually cooked food, appears to have freed up exactly the kind of metabolic budget that made investing more heavily in brain tissue, rather than digestive tissue, a genuinely viable evolutionary strategy, in a way that simply wasn't available to plenty of other primate lineages that remained more strictly herbivorous. Now let's bring in something genuinely fascinating regarding environmental instability, because this represents one of the more compelling, actively researched explanations for why our specific lineage faced such intense pressure toward cognitive flexibility in the first place. Several researchers studying the climate conditions present during key periods of human evolutionary development have pointed to genuinely dramatic, repeated environmental fluctuation across East Africa, shifting between wetter, more forested conditions and drier, more open savanna conditions, sometimes within time frames short enough to occur across just a handful of generations rather than gradually over tens of thousands of years. This kind of unstable, unpredictable environment creates genuinely intense selective pressure favoring behavioral flexibility and learning capacity over narrow, rigid physical specialization. A species adapted perfectly to one specific, stable environment can get wiped out almost entirely when that environment changes dramatically and their specialized adaptations suddenly stop working. A species capable of flexibly learning new behaviors, adapting to new food sources, and solving genuinely novel problems on the fly has a meaningful survival advantage precisely when environmental conditions refuse to stay predictable, which appears to be exactly the kind of pressure our specific evolutionary lineage faced repeatedly across an enormous, genuinely turbulent stretch of climatic history. Let's talk about something genuinely important regarding social complexity here too, because this connects directly to themes we've explored throughout this entire series regarding ancient cooperation, group living, and social bonding. There's a well-established, seriously researched hypothesis in evolutionary biology called the social brain hypothesis, which proposes that the genuine cognitive demands of navigating complex social relationships, tracking who owes who favors, remembering past conflicts, predicting how specific individuals are likely to behave, managing alliances and reputations, may have been one of the single biggest drivers of increasing brain size and cognitive complexity across primate evolution generally, with our specific lineage taking this pressure to a genuinely extreme degree. Researchers studying this hypothesis have found a striking correlation across various primate species. Larger, more socially complex group sizes consistently correlate with larger relative brain size, particularly in the neocortex regions associated with social cognition and complex reasoning. Our ancestors, increasingly dependent on cooperation, shared childcare, complex food sharing, and intricate social alliances for basic survival, exactly the kind of cooperative dynamics we've documented extensively throughout this entire channel, faced genuinely intense, sustained pressure to develop the cognitive sophistication required to successfully navigate exactly that kind of demanding social complexity. Now, here's where things get genuinely fascinating, because once this process started, it appears to have triggered a self-reinforcing feedback loop that became increasingly difficult to stop. A pattern researchers sometimes describe using the concept of the cognitive niche. As our ancestors became somewhat more cognitively capable, even incrementally, they became better at solving novel problems, communicating useful information, and cooperating in more sophisticated ways. This improved capability then opened up genuinely new survival strategies, more sophisticated tool use, more effective hunting techniques, better food processing, that themselves created fresh selective pressure, favoring even greater cognitive sophistication to fully exploit those new opportunities. Better tools required better planning and dexterity to create and use effectively. By the way, if you want to go even deeper into the secret lives of ancient humans, I just launched a full course called The Secret Lives of Ancient Humans. 10 modules, 3+ hours of content covering everything we never talk about on YouTube. What they feared, how they communicated, what hunted them, and much more. Plus an exclusive PDF guide included. Link in the description. See you inside. Sophisticated cooperative hunting required better communication and social coordination. Better communication required more complex language capacity. Each incremental cognitive improvement opened up new possibilities that themselves rewarded further cognitive improvement, creating a genuinely self-accelerating evolutionary feedback loop that, once properly underway, could push cognitive capability forward at a pace dramatically faster than ordinary, gradual evolutionary change typically allows. Let's address something genuinely important regarding language specifically here, because this represents possibly the single most consequential piece of this entire puzzle, and it deserves direct, focused attention. The development of genuinely complex, flexible language capacity appears to have provided our specific lineage with something almost no other species on the entire planet possesses: the ability to transmit accumulated knowledge across generations with remarkable fidelity and detail, completely independent of direct, individual, first-hand experience. We've documented this extensively throughout this entire series. Every single piece of accumulated food safety knowledge, fire-making technique, medical practice, and survival strategy we've covered relies fundamentally on this exact capability: language-based cultural transmission, allowing one generation's hard-won discoveries to become the next generation's starting baseline, rather than requiring every single individual to rediscover the same crucial information completely from scratch through their own personal, sometimes fatal trial and error. This represents an absolutely genuine evolutionary game changer, effectively allowing cumulative cultural knowledge to accumulate and compound across generations in a way that pure individual learning, no matter how clever any single individual happened to be, simply could never achieve on its own. Other intelligent species, dolphins, elephants, certain primates, demonstrate genuine learning capacity and even some degree of cultural transmission, but nothing approaching the detailed, flexible, cumulative complexity that human language apparently enabled. And that difference alone may explain an enormous portion of why our specific lineage pulled so dramatically ahead of every other intelligent species on the entire planet. Let's bring in something genuinely interesting regarding bipedalism here too, because walking upright, something that actually predates significant brain size, increase in our evolutionary lineage by a considerable stretch of time, appears to have played a genuinely important, somewhat indirect role in setting the stage for everything that followed. Standing and walking upright freed our ancestors' hands completely from locomotion duties, hands that could then be used for carrying food and infants over longer distances, manipulating objects with increasing precision, and eventually creating and using genuinely sophisticated tools. This represents exactly the kind of physical precondition that, while not itself directly producing intelligence, created the necessary physical foundation that made the eventual payoff from increased cognitive investment: more sophisticated tool use, more effective food gathering and transport, considerably more valuable and accessible than it would have been for a species still relying on all four limbs primarily for movement. Now let's talk honestly about something genuinely important regarding luck and contingency here, because intellectual honesty matters throughout this entire series, and this particular topic genuinely deserves it. A meaningful number of researchers studying human evolutionary history have specifically emphasized that this entire process wasn't some inevitable, predetermined outcome that was always going to happen eventually, regardless of circumstances. It involved a genuinely specific, somewhat fortunate combination of environmental instability, dietary opportunity, social complexity, and physical preconditions, all occurring within roughly the same evolutionary lineage, within roughly the same general time frame, in a way that easily could have played out differently. Plenty of other primate lineages faced some, but not all, of these same pressures, and simply didn't end up combining them in quite the same productive, mutually reinforcing way our specific lineage happened to. This means the emergence of genuinely advanced intelligence in our lineage specifically, rather than in some other branch of the primate family tree, or in some entirely different group of animals altogether, likely involved a genuine, significant element of evolutionary contingency. The right pressures, in the right combination, at the right time, rather than representing some kind of inevitable, guaranteed outcome that evolution was always destined to eventually produce no matter what. Let's address something genuinely fascinating regarding other hominin species here too, because this connects directly back to topics we've covered throughout this series regarding Neanderthals and other closely related ancient human species. It's worth being direct that our specific species wasn't actually the only hominin lineage to develop genuinely significant cognitive sophistication. Neanderthals, as we've discussed extensively in earlier videos, demonstrated genuine technological skill, controlled fire use, deliberate burial practices, and quite possibly symbolic behavior, suggesting meaningful cognitive complexity existed across multiple closely related ancient human species, not exclusively within our own specific lineage. This actually reinforces, rather than undermines, the broader argument we're making in this video, because it suggests that whatever specific combination of environmental and evolutionary pressures drove increasing intelligence within our particular branch of the primate family tree, likely applied, at least to some meaningful degree, across multiple closely related hominin lineages facing genuinely similar environmental and social pressures, rather than representing some uniquely improbable fluke that occurred in exactly one single lineage and nowhere else at all. Let's talk about something genuinely important regarding why other intelligent animals, dolphins, elephants, crows, certain great apes, despite demonstrating genuinely impressive cognitive capability, never developed quite the same trajectory toward technology and civilization that our lineage eventually achieved. Part of the answer almost certainly comes down to exactly the kind of physical precondition we discussed regarding bipedalism and free hands. A dolphin, regardless of how cognitively sophisticated it might genuinely be, simply lacks the physical capability to manipulate objects, create tools, or build structures in anything resembling the way a hand-equipped, upright walking primate can. Intelligence alone, without the physical capacity to actually act on and transform the surrounding environment in detailed, deliberate ways, doesn't automatically translate into the kind of technological and cultural development our specific lineage eventually achieved. This suggests genuinely advanced civilization building intelligence may require not just cognitive sophistication on its own, but a specific fortunate combination of cognitive capability and physical manipulation capacity working together. A combination that, as far as we currently know, our specific evolutionary lineage happened to be uniquely well positioned to develop compared to plenty of other genuinely intelligent species facing real physical limitations our own ancestors simply didn't have to contend with. Now let's bring in something genuinely interesting regarding the actual timeline involved here too, because this helps put the whole process into proper, humbling perspective. The increase in brain size and cognitive complexity across our evolutionary lineage didn't happen quickly, in evolutionary terms. It unfolded gradually across literally millions of years, with multiple distinct hominin species coming and going along the way, each representing incremental steps rather than some. Single, sudden leap toward modern human intelligence. This connects directly to something we discussed in our fire discovery video regarding the messy, uneven, repeatedly interrupted nature of ancient technological development generally. Evolution toward greater cognitive complexity followed a genuinely similar pattern. Slow, uneven, occasionally reversed by environmental setbacks or population bottlenecks, rather than representing some smooth, inevitable upward climb, proceeding in a straight, predictable line toward modern human capability. Let's address something genuinely important regarding the specific role of childhood and extended development here too, because this connects directly to topics we covered in our earlier video about how ancient human children actually survived. The unusually long, dependent childhood characteristic of our species, something we've discussed as both a genuine survival challenge and a driver of cooperative breeding behavior, also appears to have played a meaningful role in supporting cognitive development specifically. An extended childhood provides considerably more time for learning, observation, and gradual skill acquisition before an individual needs to function fully independently Exactly the kind of extended developmental window that would allow a genuinely complex, slow maturing brain enough time to actually develop its full cognitive potential before facing the full demands of independent adult survival. This represents another piece of the same self-reinforcing feedback loop we discussed earlier. Increasing cognitive complexity requiring longer development time, which in turn required more sustained parental and community investment, which in turn favored exactly the kind of cooperative social structures that themselves further rewarded increasing cognitive sophistication to successfully navigate. Let's bring this all the way back to our opening scenario, that lanky, upright primate scanning the horizon while nearby baboons continued foraging, completely unbothered by anything beyond their immediate surroundings. Based on everything we've actually covered here, that specific moment, multiplied across millions of years and countless similar moments, represents the accumulated result of a genuinely specific, somewhat fortunate combination of factors: unstable, unpredictable environmental conditions favoring behavioral flexibility, a dietary shift providing the metabolic fuel needed to support increasingly expensive brain tissue, intensifying social complexity, demanding ever more sophisticated cognitive tools to navigate successfully, free hands capable of actually acting on whatever cognitive insight eventually emerged, and a self-reinforcing feedback loop that, once properly underway, made each incremental improvement in cognitive capability open the door toward further improvement, compounding across an almost incomprehensible stretch of evolutionary time. So why did only ancient humans evolve into this particular kind of advanced intelligence? Based on the genuine metabolic cost constraints that make intelligence evolutionarily rare across the entire animal kingdom, the specific environmental instability our lineage faced across East Africa, dietary shifts providing crucial metabolic fuel, the social brain hypothesis, and the genuine cognitive demands of complex group living. The unique combination of cognitive sophistication and physical manipulation capability our lineage happened to possess simultaneously. The self-reinforcing cognitive niche, feedback loop, that language and cumulative cultural transmission specifically enabled, and a genuine, honestly acknowledged element of evolutionary luck and contingency, the honest answer reveals something genuinely humbling. Our intelligence wasn't some inevitable evolutionary destiny our species was always going to reach no matter what. It was the product of an extraordinarily specific, somewhat improbable convergence of pressures and opportunities, occurring within one particular lineage during one particular stretch of an unstable, demanding planet's history that easily could have unfolded entirely differently, or not unfolded at all. And maybe that's genuinely the most striking, humbling takeaway buried in this entire topic. Every single piece of technology, art, language, and culture our species has ever produced traces back to an evolutionary pathway that wasn't guaranteed, wasn't predetermined, and wasn't even particularly likely when you actually account for just how many other intelligent, capable species existed across the planet's entire evolutionary history without ever developing anything resembling civilization. We didn't earn our way to the top of some evolutionary ladder that was always waiting for us. We stumbled into an unusually fortunate, unusually specific set of circumstances, and then, once cognitive complexity actually started compounding on itself, we simply never stopped building on whatever came before, generation after generation, until eventually, after an almost incomprehensible stretch of evolutionary time, that same upright scanning, endlessly curious primate ended up here, somehow watching a video trying to figure out exactly how any of this happened in the first place.